Fox News just hit Donald Trump where it hurts with a devastating economic report that's a direct consequence of Trump's tariffs. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, it's always fun when Fox takes a shot at Donald Trump or is forced to with his disastrous economic policies. So we're going to play this clip and unpack it together.
First quarter GDP, however, the final read is negative 0.5%. We were expecting a loss of 0.2% for first quarter GDP. This is the first negative read that we've actually clocked since the first quarter of 2022. That's according to the Commerce Department. But again, that GDP read, this is actually even more of a loss in the range.
So the economy shrank on Donald Trump's watch in the first quarter of his second term. And it actually shrank greater than what was expected. It was initially reported that it only shrank by 0.2%, which is still quite a bit. But actually, it's more than that. It's more than double that. So even as Fox Business reports, the U.S. economy shrank 0.5% in the first quarter of 2025. And this is the key part. Drumroll, please. Amid tariff uncertainty, economists expected GDP to contract at a 0.2% rate. Now it's 0.5. And the culprit? Tariff uncertainty, a direct consequence of Donald Trump's disastrous tariff policy. The U.S. economy contracted in the first quarter as tariffs caused importers to surge shipments before their higher levies took effect. The Commerce Department's Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, released its third estimate for first quarter GDP, which found the U.S. economy contracted at an annual rate of 0.5% in the first quarter, which runs from January through March. Economists surveyed by the LSEG had expected the economy to contract at a 0.2% rate in the quarter, in line with the second preliminary reading. The contraction comes after a 2.4% GDP growth was recorded in the fourth quarter. So let's stop right there. In the last quarter, the last full quarter of President Biden, the economy grew. It expanded at 2.4%. Donald Trump's first quarter back in office with his disastrous tariff policy, it shrank. It shrank 0.5 percentage points. Utterly disastrous in terms of its implications for Trump's tariff policy. Very rarely can you draw such a straight line between a disastrous economic policy of a president and the consequences. And I should point out, remember that the Republican and Trump policy when President Biden was in office was that if anything bad happened in the economy on Biden's watch, even if it wasn't his direct consequence, even if it wasn't directly because or solely because of something he did, it just happened on his watch, they held him politically accountable. It's Donald Trump's, or it's Joe Biden's fault. It's Joe Biden's fault. Joe Biden is to blame. That standard means even if you couldn't draw a straight line here, you would still have to blame Trump because this happened on his watch, not Biden's. But we actually know from the economists themselves it's because of tariff uncertainty. The 0.5% GDP contraction shown in the final first quarter GDP figures is the first quarterly contraction since the first quarter of 2022. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. So many months of high growth under President Biden, except for, again, that first quarterly GDP in 2022. And the first quarter of Trump's second term, the first quarter right out the gate, it shrinks. The decline in GDP was attributed primarily to an increase in imports along with a decrease in government spending. Those shifts were partly offset by increases in investment and consumer spending. Imports surged 37.9% in the first quarter and accounted for a contraction of 4.66% in GDP as firms ramped up imports in an effort to minimize the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods. In the GDP calculation, imports are subtracted because the metric is meant to measure domestic production. This occurred because of Trump's disastrous tariff policy. Donald Trump is directly to blame for this, and he keeps doubling down on this disastrous policy regardless of its implications. And on that score, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testified before the United States Senate. And he had a good exchange with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was a longtime critic and still is of Jerome Powell. But during that exchange, he admitted that, uncertainty about tariffs is why the Federal Reserve has yet to reduce interest rates. It's a direct consequence of Trump's own policy. So when people are paying higher interest rates, it's because of Donald Trump. If not for Trump, if Trump had merely continued the trajectory left for him by President Biden, then interest rates would have been cut even more at this point, more than likely. So let's play this clip of the exchange between Jerome Powell and Elizabeth Warren.
Fed's outlook on inflation, the labor market, and GDP growth have all gotten worse. Compared to your economic projections in December, the latest numbers show that the Fed is now projecting higher inflation from 2.5% in December now to 3.1%. Higher unemployment from 4.3% to 4.5%. Lower economic growth from 2.1% projected just 6 months ago to 1.4% that you're now projecting. Chair Powell, what has changed in the last 6 months that has caused the Fed to forecast substantially higher inflation, somewhat higher unemployment, and lower economic growth than you did in December?
So some of it is just taking signal from data reports that we've seen. Some of it is people working in the possible effects in the short term of tariffs. We have no view on the wisdom or the longer term effects of trade policy. It's not our job. And by the way, I should add, our forecasts are generally, and in this case, are very, very similar to what outside forecasters
I understand
are
that. I'm just using.
Exactly. So he's like, look, guys, I'm not even opining about the long-term efficacy of this tariff policy, although I'm sure if you forced him to, under truth serum or something like that, he would say, yeah, I think this is a bad idea. But our forecast internally as the Federal Reserve, as the board, the body that dictates monetary policy in the United States, matches what we see from pretty much every reputable forecaster outside the Federal Reserve, saying that the tariffs are causing this. The tariffs are causing us to, or rather, the probable short-term inflationary effects of these tariffs are causing us to delay interest rates cuts. Because you may recall that in the last couple of months of the Biden administration, the Federal Reserve did cut interest rates by a few base points. And again, it was on track to continue if Trump had merely kept up the Biden trajectory that he inherited. But this is the thing. You'll recall, how will I say this? Trying to fight the urge to get on my soapbox. Screw it. I'm going to get on the soapbox anyway. Trump has been president 2 times. And when he was inaugurated in January of 2017, he inherited a pretty good economy from Barack Obama. And then by the time of COVID, he drove it into the ground. Okay. Now, the problem is that Trump supporters in and out of office want you to believe that Trump didn't inherit anything good from Barack Obama. It was like God before the Big Bang or whatever. There was nothing, there was him, and he just snapped his fingers, and then voila, he single-handedly created the U.S. economy in its totality. But also at the same time, he's not responsible for the economy collapsing on his watch. So again, they have it gerrymandered where he gets all of the credit, but none of the blame, even if he's in power. And then he's inaugurated again in January 2021 and also inherits a pretty good economy from President Biden. It's the envy of the world. It is objectively the strongest economy in the world, the best recovered from the COVID pandemic, which had a global presence. And in Trump's first quarter, he shrank the GDP. He shrank the economy by definition. And now they're revising the numbers, and it looks even worse than the initial estimates. He has a really bad habit, Trump does, of inheriting really good things and then driving them into the ground due to his mismanagement. Interest rates suck. And Trump wants them lowered because he wants to reap the political benefit from it. But again, he could just end this right now if he would just cancel his disastrous tariff policy and make it clear to the markets and our global trading partners that he has no interest in resuming this. You know what, guys? I've seen the light. I've seen the error of my ways. This isn't going to work. So we're canceling all the Liberation Day tariffs. There's none of it. We're done with that. Then it seems highly likely that the Federal Reserve would seriously reconsider cutting interest rates. As it stands, he wants the interest rates cut while creating the exact circumstances which force the Fed to not cut interest rates. Make it make sense. These things are mutually exclusive. Trump's position on this is mutually exclusive. And he doesn't care. And he's hoping you don't notice. And he's hoping you don't blame him for the interest rates remaining what they are. But they are his fault in its totality. And again, Jerome Powell has made that abundantly clear, which is probably why, among other things, Trump has repeatedly threatened to unlawfully fire Jerome Powell. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.